Usually when you picture a central bank, the image that comes to mind is, pretty static.
Yeah, like a vault.
Exactly, a vault, a fortress. You imagine thick steel doors, gold bars stacked up to the ceiling, armed guards everywhere. You think of this institution that is completely isolated, just utterly impenetrable, and focused entirely on the money circulating inside its own borders.
Which is how they operated for decades.
Right. But then you look at a historical pivot point, like, say, the 2008 global financial crisis, and suddenly you realize that fortress is actually made of glass.
It's a terrifying realization. I mean, a pebble thrown half a world away can shatter the entire structure.
Right. A housing bubble bursts in one hemisphere, and seemingly untouchable banks are just collapsing in another hemisphere within weeks. It completely destroys the illusion of the isolated domestic economy, and that realization is exactly where we are heading today in this deep dive.
It's a huge shift in perspective.
It really is. So, welcome everyone to today's deep dive. We are looking at a highly specialized, absolutely vital piece of modern statecraft. Basically, how a central bank operates when its walls become transparent. Specifically, we are diving into the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, and unpacking how it navigates international relations and global financial diplomacy.
Yeah, based on Chapter 25 of the source material.
Exactly. And we have a very unique, highly ambitious mission for today's session. Instead of just a casual chat, we are going to conceptually build the ultimate, highly detailed, text-based blueprint for an infographic on this exact topic.
I love this approach. It really forces us to organize the chaos.
Right, because you're here to master this without the info overload, so we're going to structure this flawlessly for you. By the end of this hour, you will have an encyclopedic, exam-ready grasp of the material, and honestly, you'll eliminate the need to ever reread the chapter.
That's the goal.
So let's start with the why. Why does a domestic central bank even care about international relations?
Well, to really grasp the gravity of this, you have to understand the fundamental shift in the RBI's philosophy. Traditionally, the mandate of the RBI, or really any domestic central bank, is domestic financial stability.
Right. Manage inflation, issue currency.
Yeah, keep the local bank solvent. But 2008 proved that systemic risk doesn't carry a passport. It just doesn't respect borders. If a massive financial institution fails in New York or London, the shockwaves are going to hit Mumbai and Delhi, regardless of how well the domestic economy is managed.
So it basically becomes a matter of self-defense. To protect your own house from a storm, you realize you have to go outside and, help design the neighborhood's weather defense system.
That's a really practical way to look at it. The RBI recognized that international financial diplomacy is not a luxury anymore. It's a strict necessity to fulfill its primary domestic mandate. They have to step outside their borders to protect India's national interests and, more importantly, to help draft the rules of the global financial architecture.
But wait, I have to push back on that a little because drafting the rules implies a level of global authority that central banks don't typically advertise. How does a central bank make that leap? It feels like a massive jump from setting a local interest rate to, playing global diplomat.
It is a massive leap, but consider the alternative. Think about what happens if the RBI stays home, locks the vault, and just focuses on printing rupees.
Someone else writes the rules.
Exactly. The global standard-setting bodies, institutions like the Bank for International Settlements or the Financial Stability Board, they're going to write the rules of global finance anyway. If the RBI doesn't fight for a seat at those tables, those international regulations will be designed solely by and for advanced Western economies.
Oh, I see where you're going. Like a regulation that creates safety for a massive centuries-old bank in Switzerland might be completely toxic for a growing medium-sized enterprise in India.
Spot on. And for decades, emerging markets were effectively what we call rule takers. They had no real voice in the design phase. They just received the mandates from Basel or Washington and had to figure out how to implement them.
Which is a terrible position to be in.
Right. But as India's economic heft has grown, it can no longer afford to simply take the rules. The RBI's push into international diplomacy is really about transitioning from a rule taker to a rule maker.
So that's the core of it.
Yeah, it's about standing in those global forums and saying, hey, we have unique developmental challenges. We have hundreds of millions of people just entering the formal financial system. The global building codes must reflect our reality, not just the reality of Wall Street.
Okay, so that is a perfect transition. Let's start building this mental infographic. We're going to follow 7 strict, logical sections to lay this out perfectly. Section 1, core concept and title.
Okay, let's hear the title.
The overarching title for our infographic is RBI's Global Footprint, navigating international financial diplomacy.
I like it.
Yeah.
Very clear. And what's the two-sentence summary objective to go right under that?
Here it is, sentence one. The Reserve Bank of India established a dedicated international department to foster global macroeconomic cooperation, proactively shape global regulatory standards, and protect India's national interests.
Good.
Sentence two. In a highly interconnected post-GFC world, this department acts as the nodal point for the RBI's engagement with multilateral institutions, regional networks, and bilateral partners.
That perfectly captures that dual mandate we just talked about.
Yeah.
It's defensive, building buffers against the next global shock, but it's also highly offensive, shaping those international regulations.
Exactly. So that's the header of our infographic. Now, section two, timeline and chronology. Because to really understand how we got here, we need to trace the historical journey.
And this is where we see that financial crises are the ultimate catalysts for institution building. Nobody updates the building codes until there's an earthquake.
Right. So let's start mapping out the dates. I'm drawing a timeline down the left side of our infographic. First stop, 1930.
1930. This is the Bank for International Settlements, or the BIS. It was established at the Hague Conference.
That's really early.
It is, and it's actually the oldest international financial institution.
Mm-hmm.
And this was established in the context of the Young Plan. They were dealing with German reparations after World War I, right in the shadow of the Great Depression.
Okay, next stop on the timeline, moving down, 1944.
1944 is the Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire. The world is basically in ruins from World War II, and 44 countries gathered to design a system to prevent future economic despair.
And this is where we get the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank.
Exactly. And it's crucial to note here that India was actually one of those 44 founding countries. Even though they were still under British rule at the time, they were at the table.
Okay, skipping ahead on our timeline now, we land on a very specific date, September 9th, 1996.
This is a major pivot point. This is the exact date the RBI officially becomes a member of the BIS.
Which makes sense, because India had that massive economic liberalization in 1991. So by 96, they're opening up, foreign capital's flowing in, and they absolutely need to be in the club with the BIS, which is basically the central bank for central banks.
Right. But then, almost immediately, the world gets a violent reminder of why these networks matter.
1997.
Yeah, the Asian financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with the Thai baht collapsing and spreads like a virus. South Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, massive contagion. And this forces a huge realization. Global institutions like the IMF are vital, sure, but regional shocks require regional coordination.
Because if your neighbor's currency is collapsing on a Tuesday, you can't wait for a slow-moving global bureaucracy to act by next month. You need help by Wednesday.
Exactly. Which brings us to the next date on the timeline, 1998. As a direct consequence of that Asian crisis, we see the establishment of the SAARC Finance Network.
That's the regional network for South Asia.
Yes. And in that same year, the RBI also joined CSN, which is the Southeast Asian Central Banks Network. They are basically building regional firewalls.
Okay, moving on the timeline. 1999.
1999 brings us the G20. The G7 countries realized after the 97 crisis that they couldn't manage global finance alone anymore. They needed the major emerging markets in the room.
But the 99 version was just finance ministers and central bank governors, right? Not the massive head of state summits we see today.
Correct. It was the people managing the plumbing of the economy. But then, our next timeline stop changes everything. 2008 to 2009, the global financial crisis.
The shattered glass fortress.
Exactly. The GFC hits, and the G20 Pittsburgh Summit in 2009 responds by establishing the Financial Stability Board, or the FSB.
Okay, got it. Next dates on the timeline are a pair, 2011 and 2017.
Right. These are the years India underwent the joint IMF World Bank Financial Sector Assessment Programs, or FSAPs. We'll define that term later, but essentially it's a massive financial health check, and India was judged largely compliant.
Awesome. And then we hit 2014, specifically November 3rd, 2014.
A huge milestone for our topic. The RBI sets up its dedicated international department, the ID, to formalize all of this international financial diplomacy. It had been ad hoc before, spread across departments, but the complexity demanded a nodal point.
Makes total sense. Next on the infographic timeline is 2015. Two things happen here.
First, the BRICS Contingent Reserve Arrangement, the CRA, enters into force. And second, Dr. Raghuram Rajan becomes the first Indian-elected vice chairman of the BIS board.
A huge symbolic and practical shift. Okay, 2016.
India takes its first BRICS chair. And also, the first FSB peer review of India occurs.
Fast forward to 2021.
India holds its second BRICS chair.
And then the big one, December 1st, 2022, running through November 30th, 2023.
India's G20 presidency, a highly influential period where they really got to drive the global agenda.
And the final date on our timeline, bringing us right up to the present, 2024.
The RBI announces the revised SAR currency swap framework, which is set to run until 2027.
Perfect. That timeline is a masterpiece. So let's move to section 3 of our infographic blueprint, key terminology and definitions, because we just threw a lot of acronyms out there.
We really did. Let's build that exam-ready glossary.
I'll read the term, and you give me the precise technical definition, and then maybe a real-world translation for the listener.
Oh, good.
First term, FSAP, or Financial Sector Assessment Program.
Technically defined, it's a comprehensive, in-depth health check of a country's financial sector conducted jointly by the IMF and the World Bank for developing and emerging economies.
Okay, and the translation?
It's an intense financial MRI. They send experts to look at bank solvency, bankruptcy laws, stress tests. They want to know if the global economy drops 5% tomorrow, does your banking system survive?
How does that differ from the next term on our list, Article 4 consultations?
Article 4 consultations are the IMF's regular bilateral monitoring and discussion process with member countries regarding their economic health and policy stance.
So less of an MRI, more of a checkup.
Yeah. Exactly. It's an annual physical. They check the macro stuff, inflation, deficits. The FSA is the deep tissue scan you only do every 5 years or so.
Got it. Third term, Contingent Reserve Arrangement, or CRA.
This is a BRICS mechanism establishing a self-managed pool of reserves to help member countries address short-term balance of payments, crises, and liquidity pressures.
Which means?
It's a non-Western safety net. If a BRICS country's currency crashes, they can draw from this pool instead of begging the IMF for a bailout with strict conditions attached.
Next term, Currency Swap Arrangement. We mentioned this in the SARC context.
Right. It's a framework allowing member central banks to draw funding in various currencies like U.S. dollars, euros, or Indian rupees to meet temporary foreign exchange liquidity requirements.
Let's linger on this one. What's the real-world mechanics? Because it sounds like they're just handing out cash.
Oh, it's not a permanent loan at all. It's a short-term lifeline. Say a country needs dollars to buy fuel. The RBI gives them dollars and takes the equivalent in the borrowing country's local currency based on that day's exchange rate. But the key is, they agree to reverse the transaction a few months later at that exact same initial exchange rate.
Wait, so it removes the exchange rate risk entirely for the borrower?
Exactly. Even if their currency plummets during those months, they repay based on the original locked-in rate. It prevents a localized currency crash from becoming a systemic default.
That is so smart. Okay, next term, Digital Public Infrastructure, or DPI.
These are technological frameworks prioritized during India's G20 presidency to enhance global financial inclusion and productivity gains.
Meaning things like Aadhaar and UPI.
Yes, the foundational digital plumbing, biometric IDs linked to fast payment layers, allowing unbanked citizens to enter the economy instantly.
And the last terms for the glossary section, a pair of acronyms, FMCBG and FCBD.
These are the primary levels at which G20, BRICS, and other multilateral economic negotiations occur. FMCBG stands for Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors. FCBD stands for Finance and Central Bank Deputies.
The principals and the deputies.
Right. The FMCBG are the decision makers. The FCBD are the deputies, pulling all-nighters, fighting over commas and technical definitions before the summit even starts.
Incredible. Okay, that's section 3 done. Our infographic is looking solid. Let's move to section 4. Important figures and names. The who's who of international financial architecture.
Let's run through them.
First up, obviously, the International Department, the ID.
Right. The specific division within the RBI acting as the nodal point for all this international financial diplomacy since 2014.
Next, the Group of 20, the G20.
The premier forum for international economic cooperation. And here, we really need to list the key working groups the RBI participates in, because that's where the real work happens.
Let's list them out for the infographic.
Okay, first is the Framework Working Group, or FWG. India co-chairs this. They monitor global risks and promote strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth, or SSBR.
Basically, coordinating so one country's growth doesn't cause another's recession?
Exactly. Second is the International Financial Architecture Working Group, the IFAWG. They manage debt vulnerabilities and capital flows.
The Emergency Room for Sovereign Debt.
Yes. Third, the Sustainable Finance Working Group, the SFWG. They focus on climate and green finance. How do we price climate risk into banking?
And the fourth.
The Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, the GPFI. India also co-chairs this, and it advances financial inclusion and remittance flow efficiency. This is where they push the digital public infrastructure model.
Okay, next name on the list, the IMF and the IMFC.
We know the IMF. The IMFC is the International Monetary and Financial Committee. They advise the IMF Board of Governors on systemic management.
Got it. Next, the Bank for International Settlements, the BIS.
The Central Bank for Central Banks. And on the infographic, you want to list their key structures. The Global Economy Meeting, or GM, the Economic Consultative Committee, the ECC, and the Central Bank Governors and Heads of Supervision, the GHOS.
That is a lot of acronyms.
Welcome to central banking diplomacy.
Next organization, the Financial Stability Board, the FSB.
Formed after the 2008 crisis. They are the international body coordinating national financial authorities to develop strong regulatory and supervisory policies. They write the strict building codes.
And then we have the regional body, SARC, and SARC's finance.
The regional network of central bank governors and finance secretaries specifically from South Asia.
And the last figure for this section is a person, Dr. Raghuram Rajan.
Former RBI governor. Notable for being the first Indian to be elected vice chairman of the BIS board of directors in 2015. A huge symbol of the center of gravity shifting eastward.
Before we move to the next section, I have a crucial question for the listener about all these groups. How does the RBI balance the demands of a group like the FSB, which, might want incredibly strict global capital rules to prevent another 2008, with the reality of India's domestic need for credit and growth?
It's the central tension of their diplomacy. Remember those two Basel Core principles India missed in their FSAP assessment?
Right, because the RBI wasn't totally independent from the government, and they treated state-owned banks a bit differently.
Exactly. The Western model demands absolute central bank purity, complete separation. But the Indian model argues for a degree of pragmatic coordination between fiscal and monetary authorities to fund massive infrastructure or push financial inclusion.
So the RBI has to constantly explain that nuance.
Yes, rather than just being penalized for it. They have to convince the FSB that their domestic reality requires a slightly different architectural code without compromising overall safety.
Fascinating. Okay, Section 5, Vital Statistics and Empirical Data. This is where we extract every percentage, financial figure, and quantitative data point for those high-impact bullet points on the infographic.
Let's hit them with the numbers.
First data point block, G20 scale.
The G20 members represent roughly 85% of global GDP. They conduct over 75% of global trade, and they house about two-thirds of the world's population.
Those numbers are just staggering. 85% of global GDP in one forum.
If you steer that ship, you steer the planet.
Okay, next block of stats. SARC swap facility historical pilots.
The total aggregate swap support piloted by the RBI was $6.1 billion.
And how does that break down?
Sri Lanka utilized 62% of it, which was $3.8 billion. Bhutan used 26%, which is $1.6 billion. And the Maldives used 12%, which is $0.7 billion.
So $3.8 billion to Sri Lanka alone. That really illustrates how the RBI physically stabilizes the broader region.
It absolutely does.
Next stat, SARC COVID-19 relief between 2020 and 2022.
The RBI provided $2.1 billion in swap support to Bhutan, Maldives, and Sri Lanka to alleviate pandemic-induced dollar liquidity shortages.
And the updated framework, the revised SARC framework for 2024 to 2027.
They established an Indian rupee support corpus of 250 billion INR. And they kept a separate US dollar-euro swap window with a corpus of $2 billion.
That dedicated rupee window of 250 billion INR feels like a big deal.
It is. It's building the infrastructure to potentially internationalize the rupee, reducing the region's reliance on the US dollar.
Next data point, the SARC finance database.
It comprises 136 distinct variables. This includes socioeconomic data and intra-trade data collected in monthly, quarterly, and annual frequencies via the Centralized Information Management System, or SIMS.
Tracking 136 variables across your neighbors, that's some serious early warning radar.
You need to see the liquidity crisis building before it hits the breaking point.
Okay, next stat. BRICS, CRA, total size.
The self-managed contingent reserve pool is sized at $100 billion, and India's specific commitment to that pool is $18 billion.
I always marvel at that $100 billion number. It's such a massive shift of financial power away from traditional Western institutions.
It's pure leverage.
And the final vital statistic for the infographic, IMF FSAP compliance.
In 2017, India was judged fully or largely compliant with all Basel core principles except two.
Boom. Section 5 is complete. We have our quantitative anchors. Let's move to Section 6, cause and effect relationships. We're mapping out the strategic arguments here.
The because XY happened logic strings.
Exactly. I have 4 of them. Causality number 1, the GFC catalyst.
Right. Because the 2008 global financial crisis exposed the highly interconnected nature of global finance, a paradigm shift occurred requiring close cooperation among national authorities,
Well, leading to
the RBI establishing a dedicated international department in 2014 to formally manage this diplomacy.
beautiful. Causality number 2, financial inclusion leadership.
Because India successfully developed and leveraged digital public infrastructure, or DPI, domestically, it championed this model during its G20 presidency, leading to the completion of the Financial Inclusion Action Plan, the FIAP 2023, which effectively embedded DPI into the global financial inclusion agenda.
That is proactive diplomacy at its finest. Okay, causality 3, BRICS creation.
Because emerging market economies face vulnerabilities from sudden capital outflows and short-term liquidity pressures, BRICS nations collaborated,
Leading to
leading to the creation of the Contingent Reserve Arrangement, the CRA, which provides a non-Western safety net for balance of payments crises.
And finally, causality 4, bilateral engagements.
Because multilateral global governance is complex and notoriously slow, the RBI actively pursues direct bilateral ties. Things like the U.S.-India Economic and Financial Partnership, the UK-India Economic and Financial Dialogue, and the Joint Technical Coordination Committee with Nepal,
Leading to
targeted capacity building, specialized memorandums of understanding, and direct influence in free trade agreement negotiations.
Looking at all 4 of these, the common thread is so clear. Because India is growing, it can no longer just react to the weather of the global economy. It has to help build the climate control system.
That's the perfect takeaway.
Okay, we are in the home stretch, Section 7 of our infographic blueprint, the comparative matrix. We need a mental table contrasting the varying scopes of the international bodies the RBI interacts with.
The different modes of diplomacy.
Exactly. We have 4 columns, G20, BRICS, SAARC, and BISFSB. Let's start with column 1, the G20. What is its scope and focus?
The G20 is the global macro consensus. It's the broadest platform, a mix of advanced and emerging economies. Its focus is total global economic direction, climate finance, widespread inclusion.
What's our analogy for the G20?
It's the global town hall.
The global town hall. Okay, column 2, BRICS.
BRICS is the emerging market alternative. It's a geopolitical and economic bloc of major emerging markets. The focus is mutual support, like the CRA, and reducing reliance on traditional Western-led institutions,
Analogy.
the Emerging Market Union.
Got it. Column 3, SAARC and SAARC finance.
This is the regional neighborhood, highly localized to South Asia. The focus is immediate practical support, like those currency swaps, and direct regional capacity building.
And the analogy.
The neighborhood watch.
The neighborhood watch, I love that. And finally, column 4, BIS and FSB.
These are the technical rule makers, highly specialized bodies. The focus is the deep plumbing of the financial system, supervisory standards, Basel norms, preventing systemic risk.
Analogy for this one.
The Architects Guild, writing the building codes.
That matrix is fantastic. And, it highlights that the RBI must switch languages constantly.
The cognitive load is staggering. Monday, they're in SAARC mode,
Right.
speaking the language of localized liquidity support. Wednesday, they're in BRICS mode, talking long-term geostrategic alignment. Friday, they're in Basel with the FSB debating complex derivatives regulation.
Plate spinning at an Olympic level.
Truly.
Well, congratulations. To everyone listening, you have just mentally drafted an exhaustive, high-level infographic of Chapter 25. We covered every timeline date, every technical term, every figure, and every causal link regarding the RBI's international relations.
It's a massive amount of material, but structured this way, it's undeniable.
But as we wrap up, we always like to leave you with a final, provocative thought, something to mull over that builds on this foundation.
Yeah, and for this, we need to look at the horizon. We spent the last hour mapping out how the RBI interacts with other sovereign nations and traditional global institutions, the IMF, the G20, bilateral state dialogues.
Right, state-to-state diplomacy.
Exactly. But look at where financial technology is heading. With the rapid rise of decentralized finance, borderless cryptocurrencies, and algorithmic shadow banking, we are seeing ecosystems built specifically to exist outside sovereign control.
So, what happens when massive financial flows completely bypass these multilateral corridors we would just mapped out?
That's the million-dollar question. In the next decade, will the RBI's international department have to figure out how to negotiate not just with other countries, but with borderless code?
Wow.
How do you execute a diplomatic strategy when your counterparty isn't a nation state, but an open source algorithm?
That is mind-bending. It's one thing to realize your fortress is made of glass. It's entirely another to realize the next storm might be entirely virtual without even a physical address to send your diplomats to.
The evolution of this department is far from over.
Absolutely. Well, keep exploring the underlying mechanics of the world around you, keep questioning the consensus, and we will see you next time.